Good, good evening, everyone. My name is Wouter Davids, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the sixth lecture in the series Excursions at Home. And allow me to explain a little bit about the series prior to introducing our distinguished guest of tonight. Excursions at Home lecture series was initiated earlier this year to find a compromise to the situation that has been haunting us for already more than a year, a little monster called COVID-19. And excursions are a crucial element or aspect of architecture training. And we soon found out after summer that excursions this academic year were not going to be an option. So we tried to find a solution to this kind of pleasure of traveling that we're all deprived of at the moment, and traveling with students in particular, bringing them to places that we care about, that we want to talk about and share with them. So we thought, let's invite friends, colleagues, people that we admire to bring us to places that they'd like to share with us. And not unlike the author Xavier Demaitre, who would travel from his own room, we have invited people to guide us from their room or wherever they are. In this case, just a few rooms down mine on the hallway, but still bring us to places that are far from home or relatively close by. And in the past 5 lectures, we've been brought to Bayern, Germany and Switzerland by Maarten Del Beke, to Sicily by Adrian Forti. We've been as far as the Gold Coast with Andrew Leach, then flew to South Africa with Ilse Wolf. We're a bit all over Europe and the United States with the artist Ellen Harvey. And last lecture, we arrived back in Ghent. And tonight we're going to be taken to Paris by my dear colleague, Maude Bass-Krueger. And I have to say that this is kind of a particular condition. Maude was joined our department in January last year, just 2 months before COVID struck all of us. And I think it's an admirable way how you've coped with that new situation, being a new colleague. I think it's quite something, but let me first introduce you. But I think the coincidence, and maybe also one of the reasons to invite you, is kind of consolation, hopefully, for that tough period you've been through. So Maude Bass-Krueger received her BA and MA in history from Wesleyan University and Sciences Po Paris, respectively, and her PhD in decorative arts, design history, and material culture from the Bard Graduate Center in New York City. She was the Zvi Yavets Fellow at the University of Tel Aviv and a postdoctoral researcher based at the University of Leiden, where she collaborated in a HERA-funded project on print culture and in modern Europe. And since fall 2019, but effectively spring 2020, she joined as an assistant professor our program of art history here at Ghent University. Her research focuses on visual and material culture in the long 19th century, notably as it relates to fashion and/or architecture. She has published widely on this subject and also curated several exhibitions, and want to name one that went along with a major book published by Yale University in 2019, was the exhibition French Fashion, Women and the First World War at the Gallery of the Bard Graduate Center in New York. And that happened in 2019 and 2020. Between 2015 and 19, she co-directed the research seminar Histoire et Mode at the Institut d'Histoire du Temps Présent at the CNRS in Paris. And in 2017, she co-founded Culture de Mode, a French network for fashion researchers financed by the French Ministry of Culture. So tonight, Maude has promised to take us to Paris, to the Rue de la Paix 7, where the Maison Worth, the first Maison de la Couture, was founded in Paris. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the talk by Maude. Please, Maude, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wouter. It's a funny coincidence that Wouter and I are actually both on the same hallway at the moment, but talking to each other through the screen, which is really typical, as Wouter has said, of my experience being here in Ghent, is seeing colleagues from time to time in person for brief glimpses, but mainly seeing each other over a screen. But I feel also that the screen does allow us to go to places that we would not have been able to go together, and for people to join who otherwise would not have been able to make the trip. So I hope that those of you who are in Europe have a glass of some kind of beverage in your hand at the moment. This, Wouter, you don't have to hide the beer that I know is behind the screen. I'm saving mine until after the end of the talk. Max, wonderful. This evening is not an academic lecture of any kind. It really is, in the spirit of an excursion, a joyful romp and a glimpse into a city that many of us know and love, but that we haven't been able to see for myself about a year and a half now. So let's go to Paris, and let's go specifically to the Rue de la Paix. And here we are in front of number 7. You'll see that it's a grand building in the pure Haussmannian style. It has more balconies than typical. Every floor has a balcony here. And you'll see that there are there's an addition at the top, which I will explain what it is and why it is so important. Here at the moment is the watchmaker Piaget. But right here to the right is Melerio di Meller, a jewelry house founded in 1617, I believe, and that has been in or around this spot ever since. So if we go up the street, this is up towards the Opéra, and if we go down the street, then we'll see that we are at the Vendôme column and the Place Vendôme. The Ritz is over here to the right. So this street and this emplacement is important for fashion, and specifically in the 19th century. The place itself, the Place Vendôme, is a 17th century place. There's always been a commemorative statue in the center of that place. Whatever ruler placed a statue commemorating some glorious victory. In 1806, when Napoleon began to rethink the city grid of Paris with Haussmann, he decided also to enact a new commemorative statue here. So this column is modeled after Trajan's column. It was commissioned in 1806 and completed in 1810. And this is exactly the time where Napoleon also decreed that the Rue de la Paix would become the new shopping street for Paris. So previously, the kind of central nexus of luxury shopping had not been the street. It was further down the center of Paris, around the Ile de la Cité. So if you imagine the Ile de la Cité as the nucleus, if you go up from the Ile, you have kind of the Rue Saint-Denis. To the right, you have the Rue Saint-Antoine. To the left, you have the Rue Saint-Honoré, which actually the luxury commerce circled back after the Rue de la Paix. But that was kind of the primary nexus for luxury merchants and luxury guilds in the 17th and 18th century. So this new wide boulevard, pure Haussmannian style, became a center for fashion and fashionable boutiques only really from the 1800s onward. And already, so here at number 7, luxury watchmaker Piaget is still there. But in the 1820s, 1830s, a variety of luxury stores, jewelry makers, modistes, so hat makers, and fashion designers began to install themselves in these shop fronts, which you see here. So let me show you a picture of what the Rue de la Paix looked like in 1814. Here we have it. So you have the Place Vendôme. And so the view that we have here, number 7 is just out of reach. So it's directly to the right of this building on the right of the screen. Let me make this smaller so I can see what you're seeing. you know, in 1815, that the jeweler Malaria, which I showed on the Google map, opened at number 22. Caroline Rebout, who is one of the most famous modistes, so hat makers, had a shop at number 23. And Guerlain, the perfumer, opened its premises at number 15 in 1842. So 1858 is when Charles Frédéric Worth and Otto Gustave Baubert installed their couture house at number 7, which is where Piaget is today. And before I go into who Worth are and why he is important and why I'm choosing to concentrate my story on him, what I want to do is show you oh, sorry, I didn't want to stop sharing my screen. I wanted to stop sharing my PowerPoint. One second. Oh, how do I do that? Wait, how do I, oh, there we go. Okay. You can all still see my screen, I imagine, correct? It says that you can, yeah. Great. So let's go into Piaget today. This is a website, a watch website that has the interiors of the Piaget boutique as it stands. I like this image that that is at the head of the website. It's evidently from Piaget themselves, and you've noticed that they've put themselves much closer to the Place Vendôme than they actually are. There are several buildings here that they have cut out in order to make themselves closer to kind of the center of the luxury trade, which is the Place itself. And you see here that they've really put a spotlight on the two windows on either side of the porte cochère and also the entresol. And keep that in mind as we go through. That is interesting and somewhat important part of our story. So here's what you see if you're looking at Piaget front forward, and this is what you see when you enter the watchmaker today. So what do we see in this image? Well, we see watches in glass cases. Here on kind of a disembodied mannequin, there's kind of plush carpeting, gold, lots of gold. The symbolism is not lost on us. And you know, here we get glimpses of chairs, which presumably invite you to come in and to sit down and to make yourself, quote unquote, at home. If we go forward into the store, you'll notice some other things. So on the wall, we have pictures of watches. We have some wainscoting, some faux wainscoting that's been added in, presumably also to give the impression of an interior, of a domestic interior. This plush, lush carpeting again. Here's another view of, so here you see the same chairs, so we've backed out a little bit. Here you have the watches on the wall again. Here I'd like you to notice the books, the Piaget books here, which presumably, if you open them, show kind of stylized shots of the watchmaking workshop or the history of Piaget. It looks like there are some travel books here. Here you have a book opened to the Place Vendôme. So a sense of the history and the history of the site in which they're located. In this round medallion, I'm not quite sure what it is, but maybe the inside of a watch or the watchmaking manufacturer. Here, I'd like you to look at these glass cases and look at specifically the back of these glass cases. So you see the mechanisms of a watch. And here you have kind of a damier check print on the wall to give some texture and perhaps to recall geometry of watchmaking. If we go down, it's a bit more of the same. You'll see a discrete little computer here tucked away, the only indication kind of business. Chairs pulled up for the clients, pictures of the finished product on the wall. This lush carpeting throughout. There's actually a bar up here as well, which isn't pictured in these shots, but also good to know. So yes, and then a picture of the grand chandelier, right? So a statement piece that's meant to kind of embody and evoke the brand and what Piaget represents in terms of craftsmanship, and a big emphasis on kind of the craftsmanship and artisanal quality of this lamp. Here again, we have, you know, a glamour shot of the sitting area. So why is it so important? Well, what's so interesting about what Piaget looks like today is that the same elements are present from the very opening of Worth and Worth's house in this very spot in 1858. And it really is, you know, architecture in the service of selling, fashion, or here a luxury watch, as something that it is not. So as a product of art and artistry, and the techniques used to hide the commercial quality of the product itself. And so we see that from the very beginning of Worth's boutique, which is what I want to show you. So for those, I see in the audience that there's a mix of fashion connoisseurs and people who may know a little bit less about fashion. So it's always, I never know what kind of audience to pitch it to. So we'll give a brief overview of fashion and the history of fashion and who Charles Frederick Worth is. So for the fashion historians in the audience, you know, this is routine, but for others, this may be new. So this idea of fashion and of going into a store in order to buy a garment is new in the 1850s. And its predecessor, so this is, we'll come back to this, right? So the predecessor of this kind of, you know, going into a store to buy clothing is the marchand de mode. So before Worth, there's the job of the marchand de mode, and the marchand very much goes into the client's home in order to make the garment with the client in mind. And so there isn't any kind of ready-made garment that a client can go to a store and buy. The profession of fashion is divided into guilds, and each guild takes care of a certain aspect of the garment, right? So there's a guild that takes care of the trimming, there's a guild that takes care of the fabric, there's a guild for the hats, there's a guild for the feathers, there's a guild for the embroidery. So the garment itself is made up of various components, and each of those components is in the hands of a professional. So the marchand de mode is the stylist in a sort. She, you know, she works with the trimmings, and she can provide the liaison between the people who do the fabrics. But she works with the client in order to construct the dress with the client, and then takes it back into her atelier to make the dress up and coordinate with all the various manufacturers, and to add the trimmings. So here the choice really lies, or, you know, throughout up until the 18th century, up until the French Revolution, the choice and the style of the designing of the dress is really that of the client and the client's desires and the client's whims, in consultation with her selected marchand de mode. And Rose Bertin, the image who you see here, was, you know, the most famous marchand de mode of her time. The marchand de mode to Marie Antoinette, but to many other, you know, elite women. And Rose Bertin was also perhaps not unique, but she not only went into the client's home, but she also had her own store, Le Grand Mogul. So she kind of embodied, you know, the first stylist to also have a boutique. So the client, the most elite clients, she would go into their home and dress them in their home, but other less elite clients or visitors to Paris could travel to her boutique. And here I have a shot of, I saw that Antoine and Nicolas from Dictator here, and, you know, nobody in fashion can do a presentation of images without taking something off of their website. So here I have a planche of Bertin's store, Le Grand Mogul. So this planche is from about 1805. And I think what's interesting here is that the storefront, so Rose Bertin's storefront, is represented on the same page as that of the facade of a cafe on the Champs-Élysées. And in fact, you'll see that there's not much difference between the size of the windows and the overall kind of agencement of the shop itself. So let's look at the interiors of one of these stores so that we can see what changes with couture and the transition from the marchand de mode to the couturier. So here we have, the inside of the store of a marchand de mode from the Encyclopédie from around 1769. And you'll see that it's very much a place of commerce. The women, the clients come in, they sit on one side of a desk. The seller, the marchand, or here one of the assistantes of the marchand is on the other side of the desk, showing samples of fabric and of trimming. You'll see that in the background, there are the cabinet, cabinets where the trimmings are taken out of. So it looks like a place of sale. And it looks very different than a private interior. And so here you have these two shots of the marchand de mode going into the interior. And here you see the women in their déshabillés and choosing and selecting the garments within the comfort of their own home. And you see here armchairs, women at ease, at ease, in their chairs, in their bedrooms, in their boudoirs, with the marchand coming in to their space. So there's a division of space and of architecture within the fashion system as it existed up until the French Revolution. And what happens after the French Revolution, let's go back to this image of Worth. What happens after the French Revolution is a breakdown of the guild system and the creation, along with industrialization, of a new kind of making and consuming fashion. And what happens is an evolution of what Bertin was doing as one of the women to really begin to create her own kind of styles and impose her own vision of what was fashionable. The embodiment of the designer that she begins to represent is really taken up in the 19th century. And Charles-Frédéric Worth is one of these new kind of designers that appear in the 1840s, 1850s, and who begin to think that perhaps the client doesn't want to be going to all of the different stores, but wants actually to have a model presented to her and to be able to go into a store and buy a model that's already been made up. And this is really, quite novel at the time, and it's not completely new. It's an evolution of a change that's been happening in fashion, but it very much is a different way of thinking about clothing as a completed, created object, and of purchasing clothing. So there's a shift from having your marchand come into your home to going out into society in order to buy the garment. I mean, specifically for the elite who are used to having the marchand in their home. Now, the idea was that one would go to the couturier in order to buy the dress. And so here, we have the Maison Worth in 1894. And already by 1894, Worth has expanded considerably. So let's look at the front of the house, and let me take you through the expansion of Worth from the very beginning when he sets up until around 1900. So Worth and Boberg and Otto, so Charles Frédéric and Otto Boberg, when they begin their partnership and they set up their fashion house, they move into number 7 Rue de la Paix, and they move onto the first floor. So this is the entresol, I think you can see my mouse, and this is the first floor. And moving on to the first floor was the custom among most milliners and dressmakers at the time. And here you can see an early label This is from the excellent book, The House of Worth, where not only the address is specified, so 7 Rue de la Paix, but the place on the first floor, au premier étage, is specified as well with this label. Keep this label in mind as well. It will come back in importance as we go forward. 1858, they move into the first floor. 1858, there's a carriage entrance that leads from the street into the courtyard. And there's a grand staircase on the right-hand side that leads up to the salon that takes you into this first floor. A year later, by 1859, the couture house has already embarked on a takeover of the remaining floors of the building. So on the 19th of August, they rent the 4th floor. Here we go. The 19th of August, they're here. A month later, on September 10th, they take the entresol and the 3rd floor. So now all that's left is the 2nd floor. By December, they have a 5-room apartment on the 2nd floor for the family so that they could be closer to the atelier. Within 5 years, Worth has a workforce of nearly 700 with a company turnover of 20 million francs. Within 7 to 8 years, he has about 1,200 employees. So as the years go on, the company takes over the apartments on the 3rd and 4th floor, but notice that they're still not moving down into the bottom yet. So up until 1900, they're still only from the top floor up. Watchmakers still have the boutiques on the bottom floor. By 1902, they've started to also buy the building next to them for 2 more dressmaking ateliers and 3 salons overlooking the street. There's also a lingerie department. There's a photography studio. There are salons. There are design and pattern ateliers. There are separate studios for jackets, coats, and mantles. There are storerooms. There's a pattern sample room. So, by 1902, 1905, they've have the complete building here at number 7 and a significant portion of the building next door. So the first boutique to the street only opens in 1910. In 1910, they acquire this building here, this storefront here, to the right of the carriage entrance. And by 1919, after the war, they seek to acquire the left side of the carriage entrance as well. But important to note that until 1910, there is no on-street access or on-street view into the department store. So, think back to that first image of Piaget that I showed you, where the lights and the illumination and the emphasis is on the boutique, on the storefront, the street level storefront, and the entresol. Well, for Worth, and for many designers of the 19th century, the boutique, the street level was the least important. And there's a reason, I believe, for this. So if we look at the way that fashion is evolving, here's Worth's, thank you, Diktat. Here's the street level building from 1910 onward. And I believe this is the one to the right, because I think this is the porte cochère here and not that door. So this is one of the first street level boutiques that they acquire. So here you see Le Grand Mongol, right? So a street level boutique, large windows, open facing. I guess what you would assume a fashion boutique to be, because today, this is what the designer brands rely on is street level, large windows, view onto the fashions. Here also, you see it's marchand de mode, we can assume is perhaps street level as well. So what's happening on the street level for fashion in the 1850s? Really interesting things, but things that are disconnected for the way that couture is trying to market and to sell itself. So the Grand Magasin comes into existence. Bon Marché, constructed in about 1852, so only a few years before Worth sets up at number 7. Le Bon Marché, if you've read Zola's Au Bonheur des Dames, Denise, when she arrives in Paris for the first time with her brother, She goes to her uncle's, small, dark, cramped, musty, fusty store. Her eye is immediately drawn on the street level to these large windows and large illuminated windows of the Grand Magasin. And here, Aristide Briand, when he conceives of and creates the Grand Magasin, is specifically thinking about the ways in which he can attract attention and he can attract people onto the street through big, bright windows that are featuring fashions and that are featuring novelties that perhaps the consumer didn't even know she or he wanted. And we see this in Zola's depiction of Denise and how she is immediately attracted to the bright windows and the profusion of fabrics and textiles and materials and objects and bibelots that she sees in the windows of the store. So here, my sense is that the modiste, or the couturier, the couturier confectionneur, or the modiste, who are typically one level up, don't feel the need or the desire quite to compete with what is happening at the Grand Magasin. And in fact, maintaining their place one level up is a way to set them off from, the industrialization and the mass production of fashion that is going on at the Grand Magasin. But there are, and my intuition is that this is maybe one of the reasons why that Worth, didn't make it a priority, in fact, to acquire any of the two street level boutiques from the first kind of 50 years that he is in the premises of Number 7. That in fact, his attention is going towards acquiring more atelier space in order to, have suitable amounts of room for, the hundreds and then thousands of employees that he has, who he is required to employ in order to operate, the huge volume of turnover of his business. So we'll talk about volume in a second, because in actuality, what's going on with Worth in the couture salon is not actually that different from what's going on in the Grand Magasin in terms of producing and making fashion, but the way in which the fashion is presented and presented in these buildings and within these spaces is very visually different. So here we enter into Le Bon Marché. You'll see the large staircase, you'll see the large volume, the open space, the iron construction with the glass that is so present and remarked upon in the universal exhibitions, and which is used as a symbol of modernity in the Bon Marché and many of the department stores that are going up in Paris at this time as well. So there's the Magasin du Louvre, the Printemps, which opens up a bit later. And here, I think what's interesting about this image and what may immediately strike you is this central staircase, which looks very similar to, another haut lieu, important area, scene of sociability, of spectacle, and of fashion in Paris in the late 19th century, which is, of course, the grand staircase of the Opéra Garnier, the Opéra, which is completed and opened around 1875, if I believe. Garnier himself, as an architect, was very aware of fashion and very aware of the interplay between fashions, women's fashions and women's dresses, and the way in which he conceived of architecture. In fact, there are very revealing passages in some of his writings on architecture, and specifically the Opéra, in which he talks about how his architecture comes to light and is animated only when the women and their garments and their gowns are swishing up and down his stairs. So these Parisian spaces of sociability are meant to show women's fashions and to be places where one can see and be seen. And in a sense, so this is also going back to Le Beau Marché, to show you these public spaces of fashionability. You'll see that I haven't showed you Worth yet, because, well, I will come to that right after this slide. But here you have a public space of sociability that is thinking about, that is incorporating elements of the private interior in order to retain consumer attention. So here you have the library reading room, which is reminiscent of kind of a public-private salon per se, with a large table, seats to sit on, men and women socializing and sitting and reading. And Aristide Briand realized that he could retain consumers by having them stay for longer periods within his store. And here now we're entering into the couture house. So, you know, here this is actually Cherouy, so a fellow grand couturier, colleague of Worth's. You know, we always talk about Worth, but he's not the only couturier. There are many other women, particularly, who are equally as powerful as Worth. And what immediately struck me about this image of Cherouy, unlike Worth, is that her store gives onto the street. And you can see here that she's on the Place Vendôme, and there is this window, and you see the client here sitting in front of this window at street level. But going through photographs of the Grand Magasin, of the haute couture during this period, this was an outlier, this image with the window onto the street. And most of them, and here Worth specifically, to the left is Worth and to the right is not Worth. But here specifically, you've entered up a level. So here we're on the first floor. Once you've ascended the grand staircase, you enter into the first floor of the Salon of Worth, and you're taken through a series of rooms. So the salon is set up in enfilade, and you proceed through a series of rooms that take you through the various processes of the couture garment. And here, I mean, let's look a little bit at this interior. We have a chair. We have a mannequin here, a model, walking through the rooms in a gown. Here, another mannequin, you know, showing a different style of dress. So you have an evening dress and a day dress here. You'll see, you know, a typical interior, but if you compare it to the right, you'll see that Worth's interiors were actually less opulent than some of his peers. So, you know, a comfortable chair for sitting, 2 more chairs pushed here against the wall, a first floor, a series of enfilades so you can see through, and the 2 live models modeling their dresses. So these images come from a book published in 1910 called Les Créateurs de la Mode, and it is special in that it's one of the earliest examples of a behind the scenes reportage, in a way, photo and text reportage of what, you know, the interior of these couture houses looked like, not only on the front, but also in the back. So well, I'll show you another. So here is the, oops, sorry, the Salon d'Essayage. So my thing is covering the text, but I believe that, you know, a Salon d'Essayage. So here you have the model who is showing the fashions to the clients seated on the sofa. And typically in all of these photographs from the book, the model is standing and the clients are sitting. And here you see some, you know, reproductions of, you know, the Vigie Lebrun, Marie Antoinette, perhaps a nod to Rose Bertin, or perhaps a nod towards Worth's, love of 18th century fashion and of historicizing fashions. But you see the clients sitting in a domestic setting. So a love seat, a domestic interior, paintings on the wall, and in a way, more in line with the marchand de mode going into the home than of the grand magasin. Here's the coin de salon at Worth's. Again, here you have the clients sitting down, being shown models. Here you have a mannequin arranging flowers, very domestic activity in the background. You see a few, finished garments that are being displayed. Think back to Piaget. So the display of finished garments is already visible here. But here you have this idea of the client selecting a garment for her and to be made by her. Here again, you see an essayage. So you have the client would be sitting here, and this is either a client or a mannequin trying a garment. You have the première assistante watching over. So every client would have a head saleswoman who would be assigned to her and who would take her through the process. And then you have, the petites mains, the seamstresses who are working here. Let's stop for a minute at this image. So what's interesting about this book, Les Créateurs de la Mode, and let me actually show it to you as a full archive, because it's interesting in its own right. So it's been digitized here. And let's look at the full book. So from the very beginning, it sets itself out to be a book written by an art critic about the artistic workings of a couture process. And it's not just Worth. The photographer has gone to a whole host of fashion houses. So if we click onto the images, then you see the interiors of several prominent couture. Oh, now it's not letting me click onto them. Well, here, what if I go like this? There we go. And you'll see that the interiors are all quite similar to Worth's, except his colleagues were a bit more opulent in their taste for furnishings. But it's all, the public rooms are pretty much the same. So in Haussmannian buildings, so the rooms tend to be en filade, a series of rooms, each room dedicated to a certain process of the dress fitting, with the chairs for the clients to sit, space for the models to proceed through the rooms, and certain elements of each room that recall, a private interior. So here there's a desk, or there's a flower arrangement, the plants, meant to evoke, either the interior of one's home or the salon that women would perhaps attend in the afternoon. So I'll try not to focus on the ones that are on the side, because that's a bit hard for the screen. But if you scroll down through this book, I mean, it's 156 pages of, a behind the scenes look of a couture house for clients who didn't experience couture themselves, or else who were just interested in what it looked like behind the scenes. So, what Worth, through through the architecture of his house does is that he has a separation between the public spaces, which the client perceives, and the back spaces, which are never seen by a client, and which we are lucky to have images of from this book in particular, and in very rare engravings that are found in some popular press magazines of the late 19th century, but which otherwise were never seen by the client. The idea, of course, is that a couture dress would be individual and unique and made by a designer who styled himself after an artist. And this, even in 1840s, is not the case. As I mentioned, the couture process that Worth becomes famous for is very industrial already. By the time he has 700 employees, he's churning out thousands of dresses based on models that are easily reproduced, and it's kind of a smokescreen for the client to come into the house and believe that she is having a unique garment made for her, whereas in fact behind the scenes and on the other side of these public rooms, there's an entire host of top floor ateliers where mainly women, but some men, are working on sewing machines and churning out copies of garments. And one of the reasons why Worth is so readily invoked when it comes to couture of this period is because he produced so many garments that are found in so many collections and have been so well preserved because there are so many of them. And not only was he producing these garments within his atelier, but he's selling models to be reproduced by licensed buyers in the US and in the UK. And he's also reproducing patterns and selling patterns through fashion magazines, particularly overseas, that allow women to reproduce his garments at a lesser cost. And this is one of the reasons why putting his label and a label on the inside of his garments is so important. In order to be able to, show the authenticity of a Worth garment that is so easily reproduced. And so there's the way that he presents himself, and the workings of here, if we see here, and the workings of his business are very much as that of an artist. Here you have Worth sitting down, pointing his pointer like a paintbrush on his model, and the petite main working to create the dress of the master. Émile Zola makes a point of mocking the couturier as artist in La Curée, from this marvelous passage where Worms, who is a pseudonym for Worth, receives the Maxime, who's the primary character in La Curée, and Maxime goes into Worth and she's trembling before the Grand Master, and the Grand Master looks at her and says, "Oh, let me think," and then he comes out with this creation, and then he gets all agitated and he takes his head between his hands and he says, no, your aura is not working for me today. I can't create for you. Come back another time, right? So this like romantic notion of like the tormented painter creating these garments on the whim of the way that the client has presented herself. And here, likewise, a similar quotation from Hippolyte Taine, talking about a dressmaker not unlike Worth. One could imagine that Ten is writing about Worth himself, a nervous little being, wearing a velvet smock, right? So in the garb of an artist, saying, you know, walk forward, turn, come back in 8 days. I will create an outfit that is appropriate for you. I am a great artist. I have the color mastery of Delacroix, and I paint. An outfit is worth as much as a painting. So this correspondence that Worth and other designers make at this time between their form, their dressmaking as an art form, and themselves as artists, and their couture houses as artist studios, in a sense. So a place where one comes to see the master at work, and to see the finished products of the master, the finished products being the garments, and the designer being the artist. And here you have a very similar depiction to that photograph that we just saw of Worth himself. The artist in front of his easel, with the admirers coming to see. Here, likewise, Cabanel, similar stances, similar position, the pointer as the paintbrush, and the Maison de Couture as the artist studio. That being said, the Maison de Couture and the artist studio, have a public appearance, and then there is the back private, and which is, for couture, never shown to the client. Here, I just wanted to show you a Worth garment because I realized that I created this entire PowerPoint without garments. So what is in the back? So in the back, we have the whole workings of the couture house. But you'll notice in these images that I'm showing you from Les Créateurs de la Mode, as much as they're taking us behind the scenes, it's very much a faux behind the scenes. You'll see that there's a huge emphasis on handwork, handicrafts, that there's nary a sewing machine in sight. And it appears that all of these women are working on unique creations in the service of the client. And here you'll see also that there's quite a difference in the rooms. We've moved up into the ateliers. So I mentioned when we did that street view to look at the top floors closely. The top floors are where the women, the petites mains, are working. And it's in these rooms, the ones that are not seen by the public, that have smaller spaces and no gilding, and electric lighting, that the women work. And here you see them, the cabine de mannequin, so the models who wait here as they wait to be dressed and to go out to talk to the clients. Already we have the cafe chairs in the back space, and not the luxurious plush chairs that are in the public rooms. You have the three-way mirror. Here you have sous les toits, so in the very top floors, where again sewing is being done by many industrious women. But here, all again, seemingly hand sewing, no industrial sewing machines. The atelier de brodeuse, so the embroidery. In the backspace, notice the lighting, the open windows, tous les toits de Paris. And the hard work of doing the embroidery by hand. Embroidery was and is still, at least for couture, done by hand. Another close-up of the atelier de brodeuse, and I showed this image because there's the rare sewing machine. There's one here. But in actuality, Worth had hidden away, even from these photographs, rooms of women with sewing machines. Here you have the dessinateur. So Worth, like many others, relied on a host of well-known or unknown drawers who produced the drawings that would then be executed by the petites mains, by the female seamstresses. And here we're moving up the floors into the garrets with the steepled roofs. Here you have the jupière, and you'll notice the system, the couture system, which breaks the components of the dress into kind of a tailorized or a Fordist system of separate components. So you work on a component, whether it's the jupe, or the bodice, or the tailoring, or the embroidery. Every component of the garment is broken down and worked on. And we know that designers such as Worth went to America and were inspired by the manufacturing processes of Fordism and Taylorism, and came back to Paris and sought to implement those kind of processes in their couture houses. So these really were factories, as a historian has put it, factories of elegance, where industrial tailorized work is going on behind the scenes on different levels than the public showrooms down below. And here you'll see the tailleur. I wanted to show division of gender in between the dressmaking branches. So the tailleur, those who did tailoring, tended to be male, while the flou, those who did dressmaking, tended to be women. And of course, the réfectoire. So, you have 1,000 people working for you. These people need to be fed. They need to have social services provided for them. So there's a cafeteria in some of these houses. Some department stores even had maternity care, child care, schools. So a whole host of kind of social services that are also operating within the confines of these maisons. And finally, the final stages, so manutention and emballage. And, and the very final stage, which is the taking of the garments, putting it into a box and bringing it out to the client. So I wanted to, briefly show you wait, let me get out of this PowerPoint. A video clip to end with, from Loïc Prajon, from 2005, of the inside of the Maison Chanel. And you'll see that in 150 years, not much has changed since Worth and his peers set themselves up on the Rue de la Paix and in these surrounding shops. That there's still a warren of dressmakers making the clothes in places that are completely behind the scenes, that are rarely seen to the public, which are beginning to be shown increasingly today. But it certainly, when Préjean filmed this in 2005, most people had never seen the back rooms of a couture salon. But that there's also, I think that you'll also see the immediate smoke screen that this kind of documentary, just like the Créateur de la Mode, puts up to show without showing. So to show, to make it appear that all of this work is being done by hand, in small ateliers, not in an industrial way, in a very kind of artisanal craftsmanship way, in rooms, upper floors of Haussmannian buildings in Paris. Whereas we know that the real work of the making of the clothes is actually done in factories, often far from Paris, and definitely far from the Rue de la Paix or the Rue Saint-Honoré, where these couture houses are based. But what I also really like about this documentary is that you see the division between the public spaces and the private spaces that are rarely shown within these houses. So we'll watch 10 minutes of Signé Chanel, and then I will answer any questions. Oh. My internet seems to have slowed down with Zoom. Wait, let me stop my screen share. Maybe then my internet will pick up and I can start again. 1 second. Okay. Okay. 1 second. Wait, let me just pause this and find you again. Voila. Okay.
Ah non, 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 c'est sublime, c'est magnifique, la haute couture de Paris. Quelle élégance, c'est Coco Chanel, c'est un style qui défile, c'est mademoiselle.
Ah merde, il y a une caméra ici? Mais depuis quand? Bon, pas de coquille aujourd'hui. Oh fiche. Quel supplice.
Quand ça va démarrer, ça va chauffer.
J'en ai des angoisses, cette collection. Qu'est-ce qu'il va nous faire cette année? Qu'est-ce qu'il va nous créer? Qu'est-ce qu'il va nous pondre?
J'en sais rien.
Pas des trucs chiants, j'espère. Et des bordés, des trucs et des machins. Des tresses, il va faire avec des galons. Non. Bah, si c'est des galons, si c'est des galons, pas trop, parce que tu poses dessus, c'est pas embêtant. Ouais. Mais si c'est des tresses, c'est des incrustations, c'est plus chiant.
Bienvenue à Paris, rue Cambon, dans les ateliers historiques de la maison Chanel. Nous allons découvrir du croquis au défilé toute une collection haute couture. Nous suivrons les premiers ateliers, Madame Jacqueline, Madame Cécile, Madame Martine, mais aussi bien sûr l'irremplaçable, incroyable, indépassable Karl Lagerfeld. On rencontrera les ouvrières patientes, acharnées, drôles, talentueuses dans leurs gestes, leurs coups de feu. Et Laurence qui va coudre et en découdre. Tout, vous saurez tout du monde de la haute couture.
Là, c'est la pure couture.
Voilà. Et là, c'est une robe, c'est des résistules brodés, ou pas brodés, très, 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 très légers. Et là, il y a un volant légèrement en forme, mais pas froncé, donc coquillé, sur justement tout ça, plissé, froncé pour que ça tienne, qui pousse là au-delà que ça retrouve. C'est tout pour aujourd'hui.
C'est très très beau. C'est ah oui, très beau.
Moi, je vais voir faire ça. Ce que je teste, c'est quand le téléphone sort des choses comme ça au milieu. Hein. Parce que c'est comme la broderie de faire ça. En fait, je suis que dessinateur. Artiste graphique, comme on dit.
Bon courage, Jacqueline. Oui, merci beaucoup. Faites. Voilà, bah maintenant, il faut chercher les nouvelles lignes. Je ne sais pas par quoi je vais commencer. Il m'a mis une pince à l'épaule.
Oui, c'est ce que je regardais.
Oh, dis donc, il faut que je lise ces croquis. Hein. Coller revers, loin du cou, dégager, 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 dégager. Et ça faut lire.
Jupe de lainage, fond office de jupon, bouton, plus basque, plus bas que la taille. Ah, plus bas que la taille. Tu déchiffres pas beaucoup, Carl, toi. Hein bon, moi, je suis pas habituée. Hein. Bouton plus bas que la taille. Tailleur noir et robe de satin blanc, veste. Veste quoi
Veste de satin et jupe. Et jupe. Des fois, j'arrive pas à le faire.
Il y a de la camelote, hein. Oui, on va encore être bien occupé. Hein.
L'étoile, c'est pour les proportions, pour les épaules, pour l'aplomb, pour tout ça. Parce que si on commence dans le tissu directement, on peut se perdre un peu dans le mou et dans le flou. C'est très dangereux. C'est bien d'avoir un truc structuré qui sert de base, de patron, c'est après détruit, et on coupe les robes. Quand on a la toile, on voit, voilà la proportion, voilà l'esprit de ce qu'on voudrait donner, et il s'agit de ne pas trop se tromper.
Voilà, c'est tout à fait le croquis. Il faut qu'elle garde les bras en l'air, Martina. Voilà, les bras comme ça. Une main dans la poche et l'autre en l'air, comme ça. Voilà, comme le croquis. Je crois que c'est pas mal. Oh, ça va plaire. Caroline, la toile est tombée.
Si quelque chose tombe du cintre, c'est que ça va plaire.
Ouais. Il y a des tas de trucs comme ça en la couture, tout ça. Des tas de petites choses du genre, le nœud dans le centimètre, c'est du travail. Renverser une boîte d'épagne, c'est une dispute.
Et l'autre, cette par-dessus votre épaule en disant je m'en fous. Ça fait quoi ça?
Eh ben, ça trompe le sort. Ça veut dire j'en ai rien à faire. Ma boîte est tombée, je la ramasse et j'en ai rien à faire.
Au revoir, Fidane.
Quand c'est le premier essayage, on ne sait jamais. Normalement, bon, ce que j'ai vu est bien. Maintenant, il faut que ça lui plaise. On n'a pas le droit à l'erreur, là. Normalement. Sinon, on rectifie. Vu que c'est Lucinda, regarde qu'il y a peut-être lui. Vu que Lucinda est chef de la robe. Allô? D'accord, merci. Il est parti de chez lui, je m'en fous.
Oh, il arrive.
Alors, toi, alors, elle qui sait s'organiser. D'accord, donc il va pas tarder. Ok, merci Virginie. Bon, il est parti de chez lui, il ne devrait pas tarder.
Bonjour, c'est Cécile de laquelle Cambon. J'appelle parce que M. Lacarfel vient d'arriver. Je vous en prie, au revoir.
Allô?
Allô, oui, bonjour, c'est Cécile de l'accueil Cambon. J'appelle parce que Monsieur Lagerfeld vient d'arriver.
Je descends. Ah, attention, c'est peut-être lui. Allô? Carl est là?
C'est bon. Voilà, Cambon. Juste pour vous dire que Carl est là. J'appelle parce que Monsieur Lagerfeld vient d'arriver.
Ok.
Je vous en prie, au revoir.
On dit Carl est là. Et c'est parti. Oh. Bonjour, Monsieur Carl. Ça va? Carl. Bonjour. Vous voulez ce matin tout ça commencer?
Ah bah si vous voulez.
C'est que bah...
Moi ça me gêne pas. Soit maintenant ou tout à l'heure.
Les poches sont peut-être un peu trop en avant. Ça, c'est trop pas quoi. La veste, je me demande si elle n'est pas un peu plus longue, la mienne. Mais tout ça, d'un centimètre, hein, pas plus. Hein, voilà.
Plus, oui, comme ça.
Pas que ça remonte. Ça, c'est
Oui,
trop
je
pas-
sais, ça casse trop. Je sais. Non, il faut... Je sais, Virginie.
C'est un chouïa trop long. Il est déposant vraiment très...
Oui, je vais les diminuer.
On a oublié le cintre dans la veste.
Je vais les réduire en tête.
D'accord. Très bien, ok. Les actuels, Virginie?
Non.
Moi, je sais pas pourquoi je vois tout gris aujourd'hui. Un chouïa plus marronasse. Chanel à mort.
Sinon, j'avais ça aussi.
Ah non, mais ça, c'est du face et
Ça, on va pas être déçus. Blanc et ça, c'est chouette.
Et ça,
Je crois que c'est plus beau, ça. Tiens, mets-toi là, toi. Non, mais ça, c'est plus beau. Voilà.
there's a little selection of textiles, and then I just wanted to show you briefly as he
Ça
enters
sera net.
his house, which is completely different. I think it starts here. It's just about 30 seconds where we follow him into his house.
Moi, il n'y a pas beaucoup de bruit là quand on dessine. C'est un travail silencieux. Vous pouvez mettre une musique de fond.
So people were also surprised by the messiness and unstylishness of Worth's own home. And journalists often remarked upon how there was a profusion of objects in bibelots, and it all seemed actually quite of poor taste and not in line with the fashions that he sold, which is perhaps why his own design house was more austere than his competitors. It seems he might not have had the best taste for interior design. But in any case, you see even 150 years later, the exact same tropes of the designer as the artist, the private spaces of where work is happening that are workspaces. I love the shots by Printemps where the women are, zipping in. It's signing in to work. It's, they are workers, they're employees, far from kind of the glamour that one associates with haute couture, the posters of Zidane in the lockers of the women as well, and of their lunch breaks. And that being said, much like with Worth and the reportage of Les Créateurs de la Mode, which is showing an image of couture as being created by individuals, handmade by individuals and for women, that this is actually, far from the reality of the way that fashion is made. This, what is set up in the 1840s and kind of this division between the Grand Magasin and the design of the Grand Magasin, and then the couturier and the Maison de Couture, and the way that the fashions are presented within the public spaces of the Maison de Couture, and the separation between the public and private, very much, has held throughout the past 150 years. That was our romp through Paris, excursion through the streets of Paris, back through history. May you never visit the Rue de la Paix in the same way again. And the next time you stroll through those streets, do not, feel emboldened to push past the doors of the luxury stores, and to imagine just how little actually they have changed. Voila.
Thank you, Maude, for a wonderful talk. I think shedding a light on aspects of architecture or spatial arrangements that very few are familiar with, and I see many hands virtually clapping, so the applause would be yours. There's room for questions, and I think please switch on your screen if you'd like to pose a question, and then we can enter into discussion with Maude.
So also another sad part of COVID was that I was supposed to be curating an exhibition on the relationship between fashion and architecture that, because of COVID, had to be shelved or put on pause. Another sad fact. But there would have been, a much greater exploration of, I think, this really interesting facet between, the way that these houses have been set up, and the differences in ways of selling and ways of setting up space in order to sell a certain image.
Maybe I'll start with one question. I have a kind of a double question. Mr. Worth, what was his background, and where did his fortune come from to be able to set up such an enterprise in the first place?
So, like almost all designers, he came from a very modest background and worked his way up through selling textiles. Many of the women couturières began by making hats before setting up their own stores. Worth sold textiles, and sets up his company with an associate after becoming one of the top salespeople for a textile manufacturer. But he actually didn't make his money through his fashion house. His sons recount that despite the cheap labor of the petites mains, and the extraordinarily high prices that he sold his garments for, that the fashion house actually wasn't that profitable, and that he made a lot of money through other investments that he made. Likewise is true for Doucet, who became a huge collector, was that, Doucet didn't make his money through his fashion house, he made it through real estate investments, which links back to Zola's novel La Curée, which is all about real estate investments and how fashion imbricated with real estate investments can lead to the moral downfall of people. So the money is being made through the real estate, basically, in Paris around this time, and the money is not being made, or vast amounts of money are not being made through the fashion houses. Although some women who set up their own houses around this time do make money through licensing or by opening up other houses in other countries, in the UK, in South America, in New York. So there are ways to become wealthy, but it does involve setting up businesses elsewhere, which Worth never wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Please, floor goes to others.
Are there specific questions?
Hi, Maude?
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that talk. That was really interesting. I was really, I thought that your images that you used were really astonishing, especially the book. And I was wondering, especially for my own research, whether you would say that book, since it uses photography, there are so many images, which is really exceptional, but also like the images are in the body of text in some ways. There's like trompe-l'œil. So I thought that was really interesting. Would you say that book is exceptional for its time, or are there many other books like that in the fashion industry?
No, it's why these images are constantly shown. I mean, the fashion people who are here have seen these images time and time and time and time again, because this is the book that really shows that has the most numerous examples of couture interiors, and the only examples really of behind the scenes in 1910. There's a book that the House of Worth, not even a book, a portfolio of photographs that they had commissioned in 1925, which is housed at the V&A, which shows even more details of behind the scenes. I think it was made for business purposes, definitely internal, never for the public. But there are very few images of the interiors of couture houses from this time, and certainly of the back rooms. And this book really has is pretty rare. Some of the popular press magazines like L'Illustration or Le Monde Illustré would, from time to time, have engravings of a couture salon or perhaps an atelier, but it really was rare. This was rather exceptional to take the reader through these rooms. Truly. And I think what's interesting is also the text. It's written by an art critic who specifically says that he is an art critic at the beginning, and that he is treating fashion as an art. And the way that he does so through the writing and through his presentation of these spaces is also equally fascinating. Yeah, so pretty rare. And the photographs that I showed, you know, I called out the Librairie Dictat. They're specialized in really rare and hard to find illustrations and photographs and anything related to fashion. And, you know, some of the photographs that I showed are from their library and are certainly completely unique. And, you know, we know of because they really have found them out. So very rare, like rare behind the scenes.
All right, thanks. Yeah, it's really spectacular to see. It's very interesting.
There's a comment in the chat, Maude, by Maarten Salaert, who says, thanks, first of all, for your talk. And he notices that the fact that the simplicity of the interior of Rue de la Paix could be a reflection of the simplicity of his fashion.
But Worth was not known for the simplicity of his fashion. If anything, he was known for like the over profusion of his fashion and his textiles and his trimmings. And I do realize that one dress that I showed is perhaps not reflective of the worthness of Worth. But he was not the minimalist designer. Yet his salon actually was.
And were there any designers, architects, interior decorators credited at the time for fashioning these interiors?
That's really interesting, and that's something that I would like to know more about. To be quite honest, I'm not sure. Maybe somebody here knows, but there's also this interesting phenomenon that happens a bit after Worth, kind of in the next generation of designers who begin to also design interiors. And so, designers such as Poiret, Sonia Delaunay a little bit later, Lanvin, who begin alongside their fashion designs to design the interiors of their fashion houses, but to design interiors for other people, and then to sell interior furnishings as part of their brand. But that happens a generation after Worth. But you know, Worth can even be traced, the relationship between fashion and interiors can really be traced back to like Percier and Fontaine and kind of interior decorator designers. You know, Percier and Fontaine work closely with Isabey, for instance, to not only create dresses, but also to think about furniture and furnishings within the home.
Mm-hmm. Johan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Maude, for this taking us behind the facade of this building. And so my question is really about not perhaps how the interior decoration plays a role, but how they basically organize this kind of production mode within the typology of such a building. So because I was struck by this one photograph where you showed the enfilade, and so that you basically make an argument that they use that kind of distribution of spaces to, I mean, in the selling process. But when you go up the levels, I was struck by one photograph where I think I saw a kind of partition wall, which was like introduced later. So do you have like information about the kind of tailorization of the fashion factory basically is organized in such a typology of such a...
I don't, but I do know that they have the rooms that look onto the street and into the courtyard. And so I believe that the street rooms on the first floor are the ones that have everything that's public. And then you would have a separation. I think the courtyard rooms of that first floor would be everything dealing with the mannequin. So that's where the mannequin would get dressed and where they would be changing their garments in order to go out into the public rooms. And then I think as you move up the floors, one would have certain relationships between the atelier, but I'm not sure how they fit together. I don't have, I mean, this is something that...
But are there no building plans or I mean...
No, not that I know of. Not that, and that's fascinating. So the 1925 album that's at the V&A shows gives a better idea of the hallways, but it doesn't give an overall plan for the building either. But you see some of kind of the interstitial hallways, which could potentially lead someone to imagine a reconstruction of the building.
Because I mean, not all of his employees worked in that building. I mean, you mentioned like 700 until up to, so do you have any clue how many people
Yeah,
work?
so this is also something I'm not sure of. So if they have a building and a half, basically, by 1900, do they all fit within that space? Or are there other ateliers around, you know, that area where other seamstresses are working? That being said, there's an ebb and flow in fashion. So there are periods of intense activity where you need all 1,400 employees, and then in between periods where you need fewer employees. And so I wonder, you know, in the periods of high activity, if perhaps other work rooms throughout the city were also involved in sewing for Worth. And I presume that that's the case. But perhaps in periods of low activity, everybody held within that building. I mean, even today, there are, in the 13e in Paris, a network of Vietnamese women in garrets who are sewing scarves for Hermès. So this outsourcing of hand labor throughout Paris is definitely part of, you know, fashion in the 19th century and up until today.
But it seems like a topic we could work with students on, so doing a spatial ethnography of how labor was accommodated in such a space.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and within a building and even on an urban level, like it's both.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we know enough to know how the process works, but we don't know enough to know really specifically in detail how the process looked. Yeah.
There's a question by Max. Max, please.
Hello, thanks for your wonderful lecture, Maude. I have no question but a remark. The photographs, I was struck by the enormous quality of the photographs. They're very light and very delicate in the whites, and which means that they must have used a very long shutter time, and all these people had to stand still for a long time, of course, for the photographs to be taken. Very beautiful for that time.
Yeah, they're done by an art photographer.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, it seems like the mannequin are in action walking through the rooms, but in fact, you're absolutely correct. They had to stand there and be posed for quite a long period of time. And the clients as well, you can just imagine.
There's a question by Sophie. Please, Sophie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Maude. It was really very interesting. And I'm also one of the people who don't know much about it, and I'm not sure then if you mentioned it, but what about fashion for a man? And did they have separate spaces or separate organization, or was it also in it
yes,
included?
Male tailors were separate from the women's designers.
So it was a whole different building and guilds and...
Yes, and even, you know, fashion designers for women didn't design for men. So it's unlike today where a fashion designer designs for women and for men, but there are specific designers for men, which I actually don't know very much about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that the practice of tailoring, which is a practice for men, is mainly done by male tailors. So, you know, even not only is there a division within the couture system itself, where fashion designers either design for women or they design for men, and they do not do both. But the very technical way in which clothes are cut is also divided by gender, as I showed in those pictures, that the tailors, so the art of tailoring is done by men, whereas the art of dressmaking is done by women.
Interesting, yes.
Thank you, Sophie, for your question.
No, thank you.
Dries de Bakker. Dries, can you also ask? Yeah, thank you for switching on your camera.
Hello. Thank you for your lecture. It was very nice. I was wondering about the clients that went to couture salons like Worth, because I think I read some time ago that there was like a distinction at times when the demi-mondaines would go to the shop and the aristocracy would go. But I also wondered in what measure like this going to the shop was also a kind of smoke screen in which they created this kind of feeling of luxury, while the really elite clients would still receive the couturier at home. Because I kind of really imagine Empress Eugénie going to the Worth salon, or like people like the Comtesse de Greffule. I really can't imagine her going to the salon. I would imagine that the couturier still came to the home of these really like elite ladies who were leading the fashion world.
I'm pretty sure that the Comtesse de Greffule did go to the salon. I mean, it was the place to go and to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
She might have gone, I mean, the most elite clients would have contact with Worth. The vast majority of clients never see Worth. They only deal with the primary seller. But I do believe that, you know, even the most distinguished clients are going to the salon, but they are going to see Worth himself. And that's a really interesting question, because I'm not sure if he's even making house visits at that time. I mean, he might send perhaps a première to go and to show models, but I do think that people are going to the couture house. It's a badge of prestige. You want to go and to be seen and to see what others are buying or doing. It's the thing to do.
What I also found interesting was that you said that it's kind of like this industrial production, but that it's presented as something like you're buying this unique garment, but that some people actually saw through it. Like in the Comtesse de Greffule exhibition, they say that she would look at what was available and say, okay, make me anything but that, because she says like, oh, that's what everyone is going to wear. So that there were like some people who saw through it already.
Yeah, but even in saying make me anything but that, I mean, yes. I mean, yes, she did have things that absolutely nobody else had. But you know, Worth, he was also, I mean, fabric is a big part of the story as well, right? So he is also able to commission specific fabrics for specific dresses and specific designs that he's making, sometimes for specific women in mind. And that, I mean, that raises the price when you're creating a textile and you're getting it produced by a manufacturer for one dress in Lyon. You know, that's only the wealthiest client is going to be able to afford that. So I think a lot of it played in textile, and not necessarily in form, right? But you know, and along with the industrial process, there is an incredibly elaborate system in place to make sure that every garment is noted down and the name of every client is noted down to make sure that no design is being reproduced exactly twice, so that you don't end up with this, the same garment being worn by two different people. There are court cases about women who sue designers because they show up and somebody else has worn the gown. There are court cases of women who sue designers because they find that the dressmaking or the dress that they received is not what they had specified, or that it's of shoddy quality. Yeah, I would say that those are kind of the most two typical court cases that you tend to see go to court, is either the same dress or bad quality garments and frustrated clients.
I think we have room for maybe one more question.
Roger, you have
it's not really a question, but I think a lot of the questions that are asked are given an answer to in the new book by Cartier, who was linked to the family, to the Worth family, who married into the Worth family. And I think the people who are visiting the shop at Cartier come like the Empress Virginie. It's talked about in that book, and it's really about testimonies and conversation that are noted down in the family. And it's also, I think, there's a part about the decoration of their shops as well. And that's combined, I think, with an auction that is at the moment or was passed by Sotheby's or Christie's, that show that they're really working with high-end furniture makers at that time, really to improve their name into the society.
Yeah, so when Worth purchases the second building to the left of the Porte Cochère, he specifically mentions that he wants his devanture, or his two front-facing boutiques, to look like Cartier. So he's aware that they are doing something that he isn't doing, and that he needs to catch up in some way to what Cartier is doing. And I think also what's interesting, and which I have found no information about, is that all of the store fronts around this period are jewelry makers. So the modistes and the dressmakers tend to be on the first floor, and the jewelry makers on the ground floor. And if he's trying to emulate Cartier with two street floor illuminated, boutiques, I wonder why the jewelers are downstairs, and what the history of that is. Yeah, something I need to do.
I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I didn't know about the Cartier book.
Yeah, it's a new book about the last granddaughter of Cartier, and she did all the family history, and it's quite interesting.
Do you know what it? Do you have the title?
I will look it up in a moment. It is called The Cartiers, and it's written by Francesca Cartier-Brickell.
Wonderful.
The untold story of the family behind the jewelry empire.
Ordering that. Thank you.
It's really good.
Thank you. Thank you, Cédric, for this reference. Okay. Is there one person who has a pressing question left? If not, then it's my pleasure to thank you once again, Maude, for what was truly engaging talk about fashion and architecture in the beautiful city of Paris. And it's also my pleasure to invite you all to the last talk in the series, the 7th. I think it's a wonderful number to end on the 7th lecture next week by our emeritus professor. No, this one was the 6th. And so normally, yeah, Johan, I've been counting my lectures this
it's the 7th lecture on the 6th of May.
Okay, on the 6th of May, 7th lecture by our emeritus professor Paul Robrecht, who will share with us his love for the Islamabad House of Justice, Parliament rather, by Louis Kahn. I think it's a lecture to look forward to have such a distinguished speaker to end this beautiful ride throughout the world. Thank you again, Maude. Thank you all for being present here tonight, and hope to see you next week, the 6th of May, on Thursday evening, same hour, same place. Bye, everyone. Good night, and see you soon. Bye.